All right, let's talk about the First Anglo Sikh War. This was a conflict that honestly reshaped the entire map of India. In this explainer, we're going to break down just how a really powerful empire could fall apart seemingly overnight in the face of British expansion. And believe me, the echoes of this war, we can still feel them today.
So, this is the big question we're tackling today. How on earth did Maharaja Ranjit Singh's incredibly powerful Sikh empire just crumble so quickly after he died? I mean, this was the last major independent power standing in India. The answer, as you'll see, is a pretty dramatic mix of betrayal, raw ambition, and a kingdom that was basically at war with itself.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the crumbling Sikh empire itself. Then we'll look at the British advance. After that, we dive into the war itself, and we'll wrap up by looking at the two major treaties that sealed the deal, the Treaty of Lahore and the Treaty of Byrawal. So first up, a crumbling Sikh empire. We're talking about the power vacuum that opened up right after Ranjit Singh's death. You know, to really get why the empire fell, you've got to look at the cracks that were already showing up in its foundations, way before any fighting even started.
So look at this timeline. 1839, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab, dies. And his death wasn't just the end of an era. It was like pulling the keystone out of an arch. Everything started to wobble. The next few years were just chaos. The throne became this deadly game of musical chairs, with assassinations and coups left and right. By 1843, you have a 5-year-old kid, Dalip Singh, on the throne. The empire was basically bleeding out, and you can bet the British were watching very, very closely.
Yeah, as one source put it, the Sikh empire's batting lineup just completely collapsed. I mean, think about it. You've got a 5-year-old as your king, and a court that's just drowning in backstabbing and intrigue. Its weakness wasn't a secret anymore. It was on full display for the entire world, and its very ambitious neighbor was just waiting for the perfect moment to pounce.
All right, so while all that internal chaos is happening in the Sikh Empire, what are the British doing? Well, they're on the move. Let's talk about the British advance, because the East India Company was, for all intents and purposes, a machine built for conquest. And its next target was pretty clear: the incredibly wealthy lands of the Punjab.
And you have to remember, the British had a serious track record by this point. I mean, just look at their recent moves. They had just annexed Sindh in 1843. They had fought the First Anglo-Afghan War. They had been conquering territory all across India for decades. The Sutlej River was supposed to be the official border, right? Set by the Treaty of Amritsar way back in 1809. But for the Sikh kingdom, that line in the sand probably didn't feel very secure anymore.
Then, in 1845, things really start to heat up. The Governor-General, a guy named Harding, starts moving thousands, and I mean thousands, of British troops right up to the Sutlej border. Now, you don't do that just for fun. This was a massive escalation, a clear signal. The court in Lahore was, understandably, freaking out. Was this just a threat, or was war about to break out?
Okay, so now we get to the war itself. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the trigger wasn't just British aggression. A lot of it was about betrayal from within the Sikh empire. See, the Sikh court was in total chaos. You had these powerful generals who were actually worried about their own army, the Khalsa, which was getting way too powerful and restless. So they came up with a really cynical plan: start a war with the British to distract the army and hopefully get it destroyed so they could seize power. A truly fateful decision.
And so, on December 11th, 1845, the Sikh army crosses the Sutlej River. Now, from the Sikh perspective, they were entering territory that was kind of a gray area, under their influence. But for the British, this was the excuse they'd been waiting for. They immediately declared it a violation of the 1809 treaty, and boom, that was their pretext to declare war. The trap was sprung.
Now this is where the real tragedy of this war unfolds. If you just look at the numbers, the Sikh army should have had a serious advantage, right? Around 50,000 soldiers against maybe 30,000 British troops. But the leadership? It was night and day. The British had a unified command. The Sikhs had generals Lal Singh and Taya Singh who were, wait for it, secretly colluding with the British. They were actively sabotaging their own army, leaking plans, and basically ensuring a Sikh defeat. It's an almost unbelievable level of betrayal.
So after a series of brutal battles, the outcome was inevitable. The Sikh soldiers fought with incredible bravery, but they were constantly undermined by their own commanders. By March 1846, it was all over. The Sikh empire was defeated, and now they had to face the consequences. This brings us to the Treaty of Lahore and the very steep price of defeat.
Before we get into the treaty's terms, we need to understand this concept. War indemnity. It sounds formal, but what it really means is the loser has to pay the winner for the cost of the war. And the British were absolute masters at using this. It wasn't just about getting money. It was a weapon to financially cripple their opponents so they could never challenge them again. And the Sikhs were about to get a very harsh lesson in this.
So what did this Treaty of Lahore actually do? Well, it was devastating. First, the Sikh army was drastically reduced in size. Can't have them being a threat again, right? Second, the British just straight up annexed a huge chunk of valuable territory, the Jalandhar Doab. Third, they installed a British resident, a guy named Henry Lawrence, right in Lahore, basically a permanent babysitter. And on top of all that, they slapped the empire with a massive war indemnity of over 1 crore rupees. It was a systematic dismantling of their power.
But here's the thing, the Sikh kingdom was broke. They couldn't pay the full 1 crore. So what did the British do? They came up with a pretty cynical solution. They told the Sikhs, okay, you can't pay us in cash, pay us in land. They forced the Sikh Empire to cede the massive, beautiful, and strategically vital region of Kashmir. And then, they turned around and sold Kashmir to a local Dogra chief, Gulab Singh, for 75 lakh rupees. This payment covered the rest of the indemnity, an absolutely classic move of colonial divide and rule that, as we all know, created a problem that has lasted to this very day.
But the story doesn't end there. The terms of the Treaty of Lahore were so harsh that it sparked a rebellion. Some of the Sikh nobles just couldn't stomach it. The British, of course, crushed this rebellion pretty easily, and then they used it as the perfect excuse to impose an even more punishing treaty. This leads us to the final takeover with the Treaty of Bairowal.
So how did they formalize this final takeover? It was a slick, 3-step process. Step 1, get rid of the regent, Rani Jindal. She was a major source of resistance, so they blamed her for the rebellion and exiled her on a pension. Step 2, they set up a brand new Council of Regency made up of 8 Sikh leaders who they knew would be cooperative. And the final, most important step, they put their own guy, the British resident Henry Lawrence, in ultimate control of that council. He was now the real power behind the throne.
And just like that, with the Treaty of Bairowal signed, the game was over. The real power in Punjab wasn't in the hands of the Maharaja or the council anymore. It was firmly and officially in the hands of the British resident. The Sikh Empire was now a protectorate in all but name, a puppet state.
So that really leaves us with a critical question, doesn't it? With Punjab's sovereignty completely shattered and its leadership totally dismantled, was a second, final war basically inevitable? The First Anglo Sikh War might have ended, but it really just set the stage for the final showdown.